I want to ask you all a question as we get started on things this morning, and that is, what is the first thing that you do when you get up in the morning? Not counting like putting your glasses on and going to the bathroom. What's the first thing that you do in the morning when you get up? Turn the coffee pot on. That sounds vaguely familiar. What else? Pray. What's that?
Feed the cat.
Feed the cat. All right. Yeah, that's good responses. Now, let me ask you this question. Is there something different that you want to do first thing in the morning? Go fishing. Yes. That wouldn't be too bad. My response to those questions used to be, and a lot of times still is, that first thing in the morning I get up, and I have this tendency to get up really early in the morning, mostly because that's just what I do, and then you would think I could be really productive with all of that extra time. I'm not. I'm trying to do better, but I get up, I go in, I sit down in the recliner, and then pull my phone out, and then begin to scroll through email, news, Facebook, Instagram, whatever else is going on in the world. Then all of a sudden I look down and I go, oh, I need to go get ready for the day. It's time to get moving. And I don't know what happened to all of that time. I think to myself, I want to be different. I want to do things a little bit differently than that. And so I start to look a little bit and say, do y'all have any ideas? What do all the experts say that if you want to be successful, what are the things you should do first thing in the morning? What's that? Make your bed. What else?
Still in it.
What's that?
Brush your teeth.
Brush your teeth. Take a walk. Yep. What's that? No. There's this list of things that they say. One of make your bed, brush your teeth, go for a walk. Exercises on there. Spend time journaling or in meditation. You do yoga or stretch. There is where'd my list go? Here we go. Drink water, not coffee. Sorry, Gary. I'm sorry too. Have a healthy breakfast. Read for half an hour. Exercise. Have some sort of positive affirmation that you say to yourself. Write down your to-do list for the day. I don't know that I can do everything on that list. I look at that and there's a solid hour that's already gone right there, and that's if I just do part of that list, right? I don't know that I can get up early enough in the morning to do all of that. It sounds kind of exhausting, quite frankly. Much less I still need my coffee. There is something, though, that those things have in common. And there was, as I was looking through different lists and things I've heard over the years, there's a surprising amount of consistency between all these lists and that say this is what successful people do. The research doesn't always back this up very well, but that's what folks say. That's what you can look up, and that's what they will say. But there is something that these things all hold in common, which is that all of these things are part of a liturgy. And a liturgy is what we do. An example of a liturgy, this is a more formal type of liturgy, is when we gather on Sunday mornings for worship, that is liturgy. This is what we do. Liturgy is anything that directs us towards God in a ritualized sort of fashion. And so you can have high church liturgy, like a Catholic Mass is an example of high church. The church my dad goes to, the Episcopal church my dad goes to in Kansas City, is high church. They pride themselves on being more British than the Brits. All the smells, bells, and whistles, by golly, they've got them, and that's who they are. An example of a low church kind of liturgy is our community service from a couple of weeks ago over at the community building that has some songs, prayers, maybe collects an offering, and has a message. All of those are incredibly valid kinds of liturgy and kinds of worship. That's all good. Liturgy is any ritualized thing that directs us towards God. And so that means even though that ordinary, everyday things can also be liturgy. The big question we answer as we do them is, do they direct us to God, or do they take us away from God? I'm starting this series based on this is a really good book. It's called The Liturgy of the Ordinary. And it's written by Reverend Tish Harrison Warren. She's an Episcopal priest. She's also a religion writer for the New York Times. And what she does is she goes through an entire day talking about how the things that we do on a daily basis are part of that liturgy, or can be, or should be, ways that direct us to God. Life is a movement towards liturgy. It's a time when we are reflecting God in every moment of our lives. In Methodist circles, we know what this is called. We call this moving on to perfection. That's the big, high church explanation of this. As soon as we say those words, we begin to associate things like going to church, like prayer, like reading scripture, like acts of service. Even more formally, we would say acts of piety and acts of mercy. That's a very high church way of saying that. But moving on to perfection in this way can also have its very low church pieces also. The ordinary, everyday things that we do that lead us towards God. Warren writes on page 19, she says, "We are marked from our first waking moment by an identity that is given to us by grace. An identity that is deeper and more real than any other identity we will don that day. From our first waking moments, we are given grace." Again, in Methodist circles, we have a name for this experience of grace. We call this prevenient grace. God's grace that we experience before we ever know who God is. Now we can put that in big formal terms, in big high church terms, but in regular, ordinary, low church terms, that's God's grace He gives to us before we are fully awake in the morning, before we know of anything else that is going on, before I put my glasses on even, and I've got to do that, otherwise I will hit every single thing in the house. That is God's grace that is there. And one of our first steps that we take is to recognize that this is where Jesus is leading us. To know God in the ordinary things we do every day. Go back with me to Jesus' baptism in Mark's Gospel. We have, this takes place before we have any other records of Jesus' ministry. Jesus is baptized. Now in Mark's Gospel, we have this thing called the Messianic secret, where Jesus is not broadcasting to the world who He is. In fact, He's telling folks, don't tell people who I am, after He's done some crazy miracle for them. And He's like, now don't tell anyone about this. If you read Mark's Gospel, you know how well that works. It doesn't. But in that, we're given this wonderful glimpse, though, into the relationship between God as Father and God as Son. Because we have in His baptism, there's this moment. This is not being broadcast out for the entire world to see. We only get to see it because this is Mark telling the story of God as Father saying to His Son, "You are my Son, my beloved, in you I find happiness." No one else is there to hear that. It's God saying, before you have done anything else, in you I'm happy. And then Jesus goes to do all of the things that He would do for us. God looks at us and says, in you I find happiness. You are my children. Now go and do all of the things that you're going to do, and try to do better maybe tomorrow than you did today. Try to figure this out and do better. Know this more completely each and every day, that I am with you and that I love you. This is what Jesus is trying to teach us and to tell us. I'm going to put that up there on the screen. We see this moment as extraordinary, because it is. Jesus being baptized is an extraordinary moment in our faith. But it is also a very ordinary moment of God saying to His Son, you are my Son, and I love you, and I'm so very happy with you. This is what our Christian life should be also. To know the big things, but also to know the ordinary, everyday things that are just as important. What is something that we see Jesus doing all of the time in the Gospels? Guesses? What's that? I know that is really broad. You got any? What's that? Healing. One of them. Praying. Any others? You know what Jesus does a lot of in the Gospels? Walking. Everywhere. All the time. You know what the modern comparison to Jesus walking every place in the Gospels is? Commuting to work Every story that we read about Jesus walking from town to town and everything that he is doing is Jesus being stuck in traffic with 12 of his best friends. He's probably driving a Honda. Oh, people laughed at that one. Yes. Dad joke win for the day. There we go. If you didn't catch that, all Christians shall be in one accord, a Honda Accord. Yeah, sorry. The big things are important, but where do we spend the most time? It's in the ordinary, everyday things. Todd Bolsinger, he's the one who I first heard this from, and he will tell you that he gets it from lots of other folks. He has this quote. He says, when crisis comes, when hard times come, you never rise to the occasion, you default to your training. And that's a statement that has stuck with me, because our training is in the ordinary, everyday things throughout our lives. Warren writes this on page 32. She says, we have everyday habits, formative practices that constitute daily liturgies. And she's writing about her own experience of what it is that she's wanting to change because it's not working and it's not good for her. She says, by reaching for my smartphone every morning, I had developed a ritual that trained me toward a certain end, entertainment and stimulation via technology. She describes this habit in this way, that she would get up in the morning. First thing she would do would be to grab her phone, and then all of a sudden that time disappears until the next thing has to happen. And I know exactly how that feels, because that's exactly what I would do. Doesn't matter if I get up at 3:30 or 5:30, that would be the first thing that I would do, and then I would lose that remaining time. It's a habit, but it doesn't mean that it's good. She writes this a little bit earlier. We are shaped every day, whether we know it or not, by practices, rituals, and liturgies that make us who we are. We receive these practices, which are often rote, not only from the church or the scriptures, but from the culture, from the air around us. Lots of things we don't even think about anymore are things that we do. Whether we think about it or not, our daily lives are made up of rituals or liturgies that guide each day, and they form us. Paul describes his own experience of this in Romans chapter 7. He says, I don't know what I'm doing because I don't do what I want to do. Instead, I do the thing that I hate. And Paul is not describing here some big, giant, cosmic battle with sin or against the devil. He's describing his everyday, what he is struggling to do, the things that he wants to do, things he wants to change. Paul was struggling with that. Do I pull my phone out, or do I make the bed when I wake up? Just hearing some of y'all respond to the very first question I asked today, I know which one y'all are going to say. It's make your bed, right? Which one helps me, which one directs me to God better? Which one helps me to reflect God's love better? Which one takes me away from it? And the key to this is that we don't have to be perfect. We don't even have to be particularly good at it. Remember that God found happiness in Jesus long before he did anything. Yes, God knew what it was he was sending him on earth to go and do, but I also have this sneaking suspicion that even if Jesus had just been coming down to earth to take a holiday with 12 guys and get to know them a little bit, God would have been just as happy with them. There is not a caveat on God's love. God's love is not dependent on what we do and what we don't do. That's just the starting point. God wants for us to grow from there. So one of the questions becomes, how do we get started in all of this? We can try too hard. In fact, I think that's one of the things that we do, is that we can try too hard, and what we need most is to stop and to just focus on the ordinary things of everyday life. God loves us no matter what, and so we can focus on, or as Warren puts it, she says, so much of life unavoidably is just maintenance. Brushing our teeth, making the bed, doing laundry, cooking meals, mowing the yard, driving to work, and so on. That's most of our life is already made up of rituals that we do without even thinking about it. From the way that you put toothpaste on your toothbrush in the morning, whether you get your toothbrush wet first and then put the toothpaste on, or you're one of those heathens that puts the toothpaste on and then gets the brush wet, or you've got some other way that you do this. How many of you thought about that this morning? How many of you have, I used to do this especially when I was in seminary, it was a 2.5-hour drive one way to get down to class. And I can't tell you the number of days that I couldn't tell you anything about the drive down or the drive back. I just knew what it was. Or worse is when I'm just going down to Pringer's and I stop here at the church first, and then I don't remember why I'm stopping. I wasn't stopping here at the church, it's just where I naturally went. We don't think about a lot of these things. They're so ordinary, we don't even notice them anymore. So how do we change? How do we take the ordinary and turn it into liturgy? The thing that we're told to do is, well, this is just like picking a new habit. So you find your habit, you do your habit, you decide what you're going to do, and then so you can figure out whether or not it works, you take it and you say, I'm going to do it for a month, I'm going to do it for a week, or I'm going to do it 10 times, maybe whatever it is. And then at the end of that, you'll stop and you'll evaluate, well, how well did it work? Right? How well did your New Year's resolutions work? Right? A lot of times those things don't help all that often. That's the advice that we're given, but there's a reason why those things don't work. It's like when I was talking with the kids up here earlier, we talked about the thing to look for is the domino. I didn't come up with this. There's another great book called The Lazy Genius Way. It's got a wonderful title, but it's also a really good book. And they describe if you want to change something, you've got to find the thing that gets in the way. Because often it's not the habit, it's not the ordinary thing, it's not the liturgy that we're trying to enact. There is something else that's getting in the way of that first. For Warren, she said the new liturgy that she wanted to do was that she wanted to be a person that would make her bed. So she was going to make her bed every morning. She did some looking around that. She didn't understand the purpose of it, but there were two camps to that. It's not quite as vicious as the Coke versus Pepsi arguments that happened, but the make your bed or don't make your bed camp is very strong on either side. And so she said, I'm gonna try this out. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna see what happens. But she said she struggled with it until she figured out what it was that she had to change. Because what she wanted to do, and what she does, is she makes her bed and she sits down on her bed and prays, meditates, reflects on the day, or just, quite frankly, just spends time in God's presence, even if it's only for a few moments that day, it is enough. But what she had to change was, where does she put her phone? It wasn't the habit, it wasn't the liturgy, it wasn't the ordinary thing, it wasn't the liturgy she was trying to do, it was the thing that was getting in the way. She had to turn her phone off, put it in someplace different, do something else with it so that it did not intrude on the thing that she wanted, the thing that she needed. For me, it's not so much where I put my phone, it's where do I sit when I get up in the morning. If I go and sit down in the recliner, and I did this morning, so I can tell you this works. If I sit down in the recliner, I'm not going to get a whole lot of anything else done. If I go in and just move 6 feet to the dining room table and sit down there, I'm okay. I can do the things that I want to do, which is do my morning prayers, do my morning devotions, read through every morning I get 2 or 3 different summaries of news events and things that are going on, and so it's my version of reading the paper. I can do those things in the morning just by changing that domino and keeping and doing something different. For both of us, the end result of that is that we've noticed things are different. That we're not as rushed or as anxious or not as dependent on the thing that we were doing before. And that things just work better as we go through the day just in starting it that way. This all comes from the first chapter of this book. It's called Waking. And getting up, what is the first thing you do in the day? And for her, it's to find that time just to make her bed. It's a simple practice. It's an ordinary practice. But it becomes liturgy in the way that she uses it and the way that it changes other things so that it can happen. My challenge to us this week as we go out from here is, what is the thing that you want to change? It doesn't even have to be first thing in the morning. It can be at any point in your day. What is the thing that you want to change? What is the ordinary thing that you want to be liturgy, that directs you towards God, helps you to reflect God's love in better ways? And then ask yourself, what is the domino that gets in the way? What is the domino that needs to change so that you can make that happen? And then try it out this week. Don't worry about being perfect at it. remember Paul, who was this great example of what it means to be a good Christian, faithful person. And Paul talks about all the time about the things that he's not doing well. Don't be perfect, but try it and see what happens and see how you can do. And then as I told the kids earlier, be ready to come back and report on that next week. I don't know if I'll ask you about it, but maybe it's just the thought of you're going to have to maybe ask about it. Come back and be ready to report on that next week just to see what happens, see how things change and become different. But remember through all of this, first and foremost, what starts our days off is just what God says to Jesus at his baptism. You are my son, you are my beloved, in you I find happiness. That's where we start. It means that we can do anything else that we need to do. We can change everything else that we need to change. We start from that point and know that going forward, God will be with us to help us make it work. Let us go and do this in Christ's name. Amen.